Okay, so good morning. We are going to talk first about governance of impact ventures, briefly putting together some of the discussions we've been having on the strategy side of impact. Starting with a question and respond in the chat. What is common among these four? The Body Shop, Whole Foods, Ben & Jerry's, and Stonyfield. Yeah, so all of these were bought out. Body Shop went to L'Oreal, Ben & Jerry's to Unilever, Whole Foods to Amazon, and Stonyfield to Danone. Now, for some people, that's fine. They would say, hey, if you are bought out by a company where there are synergies and it helps you promote your impact mission at a much larger scale and helps you professionalize, that's a good thing. At the same time, most people generally believe that something often gets lost when one of these companies gets bought by somebody bigger, and very often there's more than a little that gets lost in the process. So one of the relatively happy stories is Ben & Jerry's being bought out by Unilever. And for any of you who is interested in this topic and also in general with mergers and acquisitions or corporate strategy, the book on the right is a fascinating book, The Struggle for the Soul of Ben & Jerry's. It goes into boardroom drama on both sides, Ben & Jerry's side and Unilever side, on when the acquisition was happening, and also how Ben & Jerry's to a large extent was able to maintain its sense of mission even afterwards, though the purists, of course, still felt that something was lost in the process. The much less happy stories are stories like The Body Shop, where there was a sense that there was a huge mismatch between Body Shop's original positioning, which was all about natural ingredients, working with communities, accepting, having a more inclusive definition of beauty, to going into, if you're a supermodel, not a supermodel, you're really not pretty enough kind of image that the mainstream beauty industry would give. Subsequently, as some of you might know, then it was bought by Natura from Brazil, which is supposed to be much more focused on impact and hence seemed better aligned. I haven't followed up in the last year or two. So both of these, by the way, are great case studies. If any of you wants to write a term paper and is still looking, these are natural ones. The acquisitions like these are natural ones to look at, saying what went wrong, what went right, what do we learn for people trying to scale their ventures through acquisitions. But this goes back to where the broader debate we were having was, what is the role of business in society, and how much can you prioritize impact in large public companies? The sort of shareholder value paradigm very often shoots down any idea that managers should be explicitly taking into account societal impacts. They say that's the role of the government, and otherwise they're just wasting money because they're not even very often qualified to think about societal considerations. But of course, the more stakeholder view of the world says, no, this is not only perfectly fine, the boards are even legally allowed to be doing that. But this is one of those things that is debates that's still in the gray, obviously not settled and work in progress. But a lot of signs seem like people are willing to, even in the large companies, take board positions. We saw Paulman in the Unilever case, and there's another example from Apple, where responding to the investors about some concerns about sustainability efforts at Apple, Tim Cook said, if you want to do things only for ROI, you should get out of this stock, and using pretty strong language. At the same time, not surprisingly, then there's limits to how much he can do, because these were sort of the extreme investors who came back and said, we don't know how much money Tim Cook is wasting. In this case, the group didn't have enough power to turn the tides against Tim Cook, but in other settings, you can imagine that happening. So this whole thing about public companies being able to really stay true to their sense of mission and impact, there is a lot of progress being made, but I think there's still a fair bit of work to do. So it's in that context, then we started talking about a lot of companies. We talked about Patagonia, another example, which would also be a great case study to do for your term paper is Tony's Chocolonely, which is the largest chocolate company in Holland, actually. And they do sell chocolate overseas as well. Again, the focus is on making very good chocolate. So this is not compromising on the quality of chocolate. It's really excellent chocolate. At the same time, they are very strongly focused on, again, using business as a vehicle for achieving impact. In this case, it's about reducing concerns around trafficking and so on in Western Africa, where cocoa is grown, because that remains a very big concern. And for them, the mission is we produce chocolate slave-free, and we are role models for others in that sector on how to do it right and how to do it in a way that's profitable. Now, how do you preserve this mission? One way is to, just like in Patagonia, the same is the case in Tony's, to stay privately held. But then there's alternate ways people are trying out, which is certifications, right? And corporate governance levers of being able to have a stronger sense of impact. And in particular, Tony's is what is called a certified B Corp. Now, certified B Corps are companies that are certified by this independent nonprofit called B Lab, which was set up by three friends who were in their corporate careers. And they were frustrated seeing this trend that there were always so many entrepreneurs that were very mission driven, but once they started to scale up and start get outside funding, there was a sense that the mission was being lost. And they said there has to be a way to crack that problem. So that's essentially the problem that B Lab is trying to solve through their certified B Corps approach. And the idea is that they would do independent verification of distinguishing between whether a company is just impact washing and telling a good story versus behind the scenes, they actually are running like a good company. They, loosely speaking, have a list of about 200 criteria on which which overlap with the governance side, with the worker side, community side, environment side, customer side. And they would go and do essentially an audit of the company, and they would give you a score and feedback. And if you meet a minimum threshold, then you're qualified to be a certified B Corp. You'll have to pay a membership fees and so on. And these are some of the certified B Corp. So actually, both Tony's and Patagonia are indeed certified B Corps, as are some of the divisions of larger companies. Danone North America is one. Natura, I mentioned, is also a certified B Corp. Ben & Jerry's is a subsidiary that's an independent certified B Corp within Unilever, and so on. The other thing that has been happening at the same time, while the certification is happening, and this is the example of what a typical certification would look like. You're getting a score, and if the score is above 80, you're qualified to be a certified B Corp, and the score has sub-scores on environment, workers, community, governance, and so on. But there's also this move towards, can we actually improve the regulation around governance? And this is where, in the US context, something like benefit corporations has come up. In the European context, different countries have different vehicles which are similar as well. And there are pros and cons. The pros are, this definition is coming through a democratic process of what is a good company, rather than a private nonprofit deciding what should be the definition of a good company or a not good company, what should be a threshold, and so on. The downside is exactly because it's coming through a more democratic and public process. This process, so far, the bite is not as strong, which is you can declare in your mission what your stakeholder approach is going to be, but it's not completely clear how much somebody can hold you accountable. There is a lot more of self-declaration here rather than a third-party audit, which raises its own concerns and so on. But in a way, it's a step in the right direction. Again, the example is from the US context, but similar things are happening in Europe as well, that's my understanding. But all of this is still work in progress. So another case study that you could work on for your term paper is at Etsy, which is Etsy was supposed to be very mission-driven platform for selling products that are handcrafted, handmade, and so on. The challenges it ran into is that once it went public, and this was even after they had registered as a certified B Corp, a bunch of investors said, you're just wasting money because you're using impact as an excuse. You're just incompetent, and you're just creating, spending money on one another, having a very nice work environment, yoga rooms, organic food, lots of plants growing all around. So you're trying to recreate the Silicon Valley firm inside a firm that's really not making that much money. And about 10% of the staff, including the CEO, was fired. And Etsy actually deregistered itself as a certified B Corp rather than going down the process of actually, in its corporate governance saying we are going to focus on the stakeholders. So again, for many people, this has been a discouraging case study. Again, worth looking at what went wrong at Etsy and what to do. Danone is one of the latest examples. On the one hand, it's of course a poster child because Danone had announced that by 2030, every single of its subsidiaries would be registered as a certified B Corp. At the same time, a few months ago, Danone CEO Emmanuel Faber was asked to step down in the context of a tiff with the investors. Now, again, you'll find different versions of the story. Some will say he had just become too arrogant. In the end, investors are also one of the stakeholders. So you can't go around beating up on investors too far, which is what, in a way, he was doing. On the other hand, others interpret that as that was, in the end, the investor saying, we still rule public companies. You certified B Corp or not, we don't care. If you're not going to deliver the right returns, we are going to take action against you. So again, another fascinating case study if anybody wants to study on what led to Emmanuel Faber's exit, what's going to happen to the sustainability and certified B Corp agenda of Danone and so on. So just to close this part of the discussion, we started the course saying there are different vehicles of impact, all the way from pure market ways of having impact through traditional business or traditional investing, all the way to completely getting out of the market and doing it through pure charity and pure philanthropy, and a lot of excitement of these things in between, both on the strategy side, which we've talked about, investing side, which we'll talk about today and next time. But we have to remember that there's a very important piece within which all of this sits, which is the ecosystems within which they're operating. And so, B Lab would be one of the players who's saying our impact is much bigger by shaping that ecosystem rather than playing in one of those boxes, or in public policy, which is saying, end of the day, if the government is not going to do something, it's not going to be a long-term permanent solution. And that's certainly another point of view. So those are two very important pieces we have to bear in mind as vehicles of impact and critical vehicles of impact, because they really shape the rules of the game within which the rest of the players are playing. So I will stop there, and I think we can stop the recording as well.